guys, so for this next photo we're going to be doing a blended exposure of Horseshoe Bend. So this is sunrise at Horseshoe Bend shot on a tripod, and this is my foreground exposure where you can see I actually almost clipped my highlights here, so I might use some of the darker exposure at a light opacity to kind of fix that. And here's the darker exposure for the sky where those highlights are definitely much better looking there. But the reason I did this double exposure was because I was planning on printing a photo from this series at Horseshoe, but the sky was pretty uneventful, so I'm not going to, but still to show you, like this photo, I could bump up these shadows and exposure and probably still edit this photo fine, but for sake of making a print, this photo would not be acceptable. You would have to have a lighter exposure like this for detail and clarity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight both my photos, Control Edit in Layers as Photoshop. Alright, so now that these are loaded in Photoshop, I'm going to highlight them both, and as always, auto align layers. You can see, always got a little bit, even on the top. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab the quick selection tool, and then I'm just going to make a quick selection of the foreground. And just make sure it gets all of this in it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a layer mask, and it will base off of my selection, and it'll know that I just want the foreground, and it'll layer mask out the background from the selection we made. And there we go. So this is clearly a rough selection, and you can see the harsh line here in the layer mask. So now what we can do is we can take a brush, fairly large because I want to feather this nicely, and with a soft edge brush at 0% hardness, maybe 20% opacity, just going to make a few passes along this horizon. I'm going to click X, or I could toggle between these, and I'm going to make a few more passes. X, and I'm just going to be going back and forth with a white brush and a black brush, and I'm going to be feathering in my exposures together. And right here, it's a little bit bright, and for my taste, I'm going to take a 10% brush and just kind of give a darker pass to the whole bottom of the image, especially right here. Glare in the water, because I think that will help blend it better, and I think it was on the brighter side anyways. And now come back here with my 20% brush and just keep passing on it and switching brushes. And now I'm going to zoom in. What I want to do before I finish this is, it looks like still kind of a harsh line, so I'm going to take a brush, maybe a smaller one, and just kind of do this 2 passes, 3 passes. Now just fix it up with a few more passes just to make sure there's no harsh lines or anything. Do this here as well. And I think that is blended pretty perfectly, so I'm happy with that. And it's just kind of an art for any photo, is just kind of blending those together. So if you want, just, you know, the more you work with it, the more you play with it, you'll probably find something you like more. Like even like that, because that foreground exposure was a little bright, and then I think that matches it slightly better. But yeah, so lastly, gonna make a merge visible layer, Command Option Shift E, and Command T. I'm just going to fix the auto alignment and free transform this. Click Enter, and there we go. For this next one, I'm going to be doing a photo double arch. This photo has absolutely no detail in the foreground, but it is perfectly exposed for all of the detail in the sky. This one is a mid-exposure. So most of this does have the sky, but this little bit blown out, that's why I took it. And then this one is properly exposed for the foreground, but there's no detail in the sky. So even if you try to drop your highlights to 100, you can see you're not going to get any of that back. So that's why we need to blend these exposures to get the best photo out of it. So I'm going to highlight my layers and edit them in Photoshop. Alright, so this darkest exposure I'm going to put on the bottom. So right now, I just want to put the midtones of the sky onto the foreground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to take a luminosity mask, and I want to target the lights, and I want clear separation of the lights to dark. I'm actually going to do this one. There's too much foreground though, so I'm going to modify it with levels. Just try to get, that's definitely what I want, and it's pure separation, but up here I want to still make sure that gets all of that. That's pretty good. Alright, so click OK. We're going to run this as a channel, and just selection 1, and now run selection 1 over here to highlight that selection. Click back on your photo to get your detail from it. And now we're just going to click layer mask. And perfectly and seamlessly, Photoshop blends your exposures based on the values that you put in with the luminosity mask. And I don't see anywhere that didn't come. I think that did a really good job. So now I'm going to pull up our dark exposure, and I can try to run that channel again actually. So let's run that as a selection because this is the same. And let's just see if a layer mask works on that. And it does, but it's too harsh of a difference. It does a really good selection job, but the dynamic range is so high that it is clearly Photoshopped. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to deselect it. So here's our middle exposure, and up here is fine, up here is fine. It's mainly here that I really need that color in. So I'm actually just going to manually do a layer mask, Command I to invert it. And now with this, what I'm going to do before I brush anything in is I'm going to load luminosity mask, getting the lights. So a 1 does a pretty good job, 2 does even better. So I'm going to run that as a quick selection and hide those lines with Command H. And now with the white brush, I'm just going to brush that in. I'm at 20% opacity right now. I can do this as many passes as I feel necessary. And because of the luminosity mask, I can do a really sloppy job, but it will only affect the sky because that's all that's selected right now. So here we go. There is your final blended photo. I'll do Command Option Shift E. And another thing with this selection, I actually didn't auto align the layers in the beginning, and the reason is because I have processed this image before and there wasn't any aligning needed. I tried running it and there wasn't anything, so my tripod was perfectly fine. So right here, that is perfectly exposed, and now I could go in, take this person out, take this person out. But as far as blending exposures go, this is final. Alright guys, so for this next one, going to be taking this photo from Jasper where I took a bunch of different levels of exposures, and you can see they get kind of darker as I went on. So just to have them, I'm going to load them all up in Photoshop as layers. I don't think I'm going to use them all, but just so they're all there. And you can see the crop on these, and like earlier, I'm going to take these all away so I can just see the bottom layer. And this layer was best exposed for this guy. And each one they get up just a little bit more. So what I'm looking for right now is the sky. And these are where they start to get blown out. So I'm going to take this one is still a little bit on the brighter side. So I'm going to take this exposure for my sky. I don't think I need that one. And this midtones one, I'm going to keep these bottom two for the sky. So this one has some nice yellows in here that are faint, a little bit in here, and then some blues. And this one will help merge it so it's not as dark. But then this third middle one, I don't think I need. And now we have the brightest and the second brightest. This brightest is close to being on the edge of overexposed. And this next one is still really nicely exposed here. And you get some nice colors coming through on the water. But in this one, the trees are kind of dark. So I am actually going to take this layer for the water. And then this layer for the trees. So I'm going to call this trees. Call this water and foreground. And I'm going to call this pure sky exposure. And this will just be help for the sky range. Alright, so first thing is I'm going to take sky photos and I'm going to try to merge them nicely. So we have the really dark one and then this little bit of a lighter one. And all I think I'm going to do is put a layer mask on here and with like a 50% brush, just so they're nicely blended, just kind of get those in. Get those nice colored areas in there. So there's clear separation. So now what I'm going to do is Command Option Shift E, and this is our sky layer. Now I can move these guys to the bottom because I'm good with just the sky layer. And now the water and foreground. So the best way to do this, I'm going to put the trees under here. For the sky layer, which is here, and the water and foreground layer, I'm going to come back to my water and foreground layer, and I'm going to make a selection of this foreground. Make sure I get all of this. And that's a pretty good rough layer of this. And trees are very tough to get. And they're also really crucial because they can give away a photo or not. So I'm going to come up to Select and Mask. And you can see the selection I just did. It's very choppy. So I'm going to take this tool right here, just the Refine Edge brush tool, and I'm just going to kind of brush over this, and it should help the selection. And it's doing that through exposure value, so it's kind of getting the tree but missing the foreground. Sorry, it's getting the tree but not getting the sky, which is nice. Get over that and you can see it come through opposed to just being covered in red. So this Select and Mask tool, it does a very good job of this. Before I keep going, always put your radius to like 1 pixel. It'll just help with the edge detection. This guy, I'm going to do a quick one of just the horizon. But I'm going to come over here, take that out because I don't want it to come into the mountain. So just with a little brush, make sure those areas don't get hit. Come back and just make sure they touch this top part. Okay, now come up here. Get this guy. Just making sure all of this is selected to the best it can be. It will make our lives easier later. And now for these trees here, just gonna get a rough brush over them. There we go. Make sure we get down in those trees. Alright, now you can see our selection is much better. So we're going to click OK. I just did the quick selection of the foreground, and then I touched up the selection in the Select and Mask. And now that my entire sky exposure, which is underexposed for the foreground, is showing, and just the land is exposed. So when I layer mask it, that land is going to be taken out and the sky will be showing. So now that we have our selection, click layer mask, and you can see the layer mask took the sky and put it on our water and foreground. So it does a pretty good job. There's certain areas that need to be touched up, like here, here. This is too dark. But it did a pretty good job of blending these exposures. Really fast. I'm going to put my tree layer on top, make it visible. Alright, so on this trees layer, I'm going to make a layer mask. I'm going to invert that because I don't want it to be shown everywhere. But I want to bring up a little bit of detail here and here. So I'm going to now take a white brush. Let's say 35% opacity. And I am just going to brush in some of this detail right here. And yes, I know I'm going in the sky, but we're going to fix that when we fix the mountain. But that helps big time. I'm going to click X to get to a black brush and just kind of make sure I didn't go too much into the rocks down here. But that helps a lot. So you can see before, after. I am going to take a black brush and make sure it didn't go into this mountain. But now you can see before and after definitely help big time. Now over here with the white brush again, just going to kind of brush in some detail because that was a super dark area and we want to have a nice dynamic range right there. Maybe a little bit down in here actually too. So before, after. And I think the brightness of these trees now and these rocks don't make anything look out of place, but you can definitely see the help in dynamic range with this trees layer. So that helps definitely a lot. So we have our water and foreground layer, and then we put in our sky layer, and now we fixed up some of the midtones like the trees and some of the rocks, and this definitely is a much better full high dynamic range photo. However, we need to fix these blending lines, and you can see the doubles here. So back on the sky layer, take a brush, and over here actually did a really good job. So I don't think I need to touch that up. I think it starts around these mountains. So take 20% opacity brush and just do a few passes through here to kind of take that little doubling away that you can see right here. Just kind of get that out of there. So do a few harsh passes, make sure you erase that line, but now you have this really dark halo along here. So now we're going to take white brush, make a few passes. You can do this with a pretty big brush for feathering, and that helps big time. Now come over here and do the same for this mountain. I'm going to do a few hard passes just to get that really harsh line out of there, and now I will feather it nicely. Take a really big brush, and there we go. Now this last little section over here, make sure there's no harsh lines for blending. And now just do a few passes. And that looks seamless. And I think it's blended really nicely. Still have our trees blended nicely with that. This sky layer, I do notice some darker parts right here. I'm just gonna brighten that up. Make sure I didn't miss anything. And I think everything is merged awesomely. So I'm gonna do Command Option Shift E to make our merge visible layer. Command T, fix the auto alignment. Make sure nothing is cropped out or empty. And here's our new exposure.